Welcome to this course on conflict resolution and specifically how to communicate through disagreement and come out better on the other end of that disagreement. My name is Alex Kandinik and I'll be your instructor. In this video, I'll tell you a little bit about what to expect from this course, a little bit about my background, and we'll start right away. Well, I made this course so you can take it in under 1 hour or definitely under 1 day so you can immediately begin applying the techniques in this course to your daily work or daily personal life. And what we're going to look at in this course are common reasons for disagreements, common techniques for handling disagreements, and de-escalation techniques. And we're also going to look at how the brain works and which parts of the brain are activated so that you can understand the biology of what's happening during the disagreement and handle them better. We'll also talk about traditional conflict management and good practice conflict management techniques used in Fortune 500 companies so that by the end of this course, you'll know exactly the root causes of your disagreements, how to approach your disagreements in a way that's constructive, that will help you find common ground, resolve disagreements, and actually strengthen your relationships with the people that you're dealing with for the long term. So it's not just about handling the disagreement, it's about actually having that interaction be the foundation for a stronger, more resilient relationship for the long term, which is probably exactly what you want. And a little bit about my background in conflict resolution. Well, I have 20 years of professional experience, with a large part of that being a business owner and a large part of that being a business coach. So I've also had to do this on my own, deal with clients, deal with people who I hire, deal with my employees, and make sure that whenever we have a disagreement, it's with a positive tone and a constructive tone that isn't setting people against one another, but actually uniting people to figure out what is the best path forward, get everybody's buy-in, and get everybody motivated ultimately to work on the same solution and be on the same page, emerging out of a disagreement in a united agreement. And that's what you'll learn in this course, how to make disagreements into a positive thing from which you move on in a better way. So that's the course. Welcome. And let's begin. Whenever you're dealing with disagreement, the very first thing you want to do is to start identifying the root cause of the disagreement. And what you really don't want to do is dive nose deep into the disagreement, because we've all seen that scenario, and sometimes we've been in that scenario where we just repeat our point and the other person repeats their point and we think they didn't get our point, so we repeat our point, and then they think that we didn't understand their point, they repeat their point, and it's just a shouting match. You really want to avoid going in that direction where it's just dumb, right? Nobody's understanding anybody and nobody's listening to anybody. People are just getting angrier. You want to avoid that, and you want to start thinking, what is the root cause? And in this video, I want to highlight that one of the greatest root causes is miscommunication. Sometimes the argument doesn't need to happen at all. It's an accident. We don't know that if we start arguing and getting angry. These are all assumptions, like we can't get into the other person's brain. So what I want to do in this video is go over a few of the most common reasons for miscommunication, and then later in the course we're going to unpack strategies for how to deal with it and solve that easily, because some disagreements, yes, they are difficult to resolve, but miscommunications, they shouldn't happen in the first place, and they can be easy to resolve if they're addressed early without too much negative emotion capturing and captivating people. So the first way that miscommunications happen is just misuse of terminology. I'll give you an example. I hired someone to do my video editing, and we agreed on everything, the work, the price, everything. And then somewhere after that, I also mentioned captions. This term captions actually can mean different things. It can mean the closed captions, after every word there's a caption in the bottom of the video. If you picture manually, it will take a really long time for somebody to manually write that. But you might also see captions like, I'm going to display one now. That kind of a caption is just like 3 words, hello world or something, just to highlight what the person is saying. Now, the amount of time that it takes for captioning the entire video by hand versus a couple of words here and there is night and day. For somebody that I might hire, that means a difference between hours and hours of work versus a couple of extra minutes or seconds of work. And so when I said captions, I meant those little captions. And the other individual thought I meant they wanted me to caption every single word by hand in the video, which for the same price, because we were working on a fixed price, they were like, oh, I'm being asked something crazy. And I'm like, well, I'm asking for something very easy to do. Like, it just takes an extra couple of minutes. And without understanding that we were just using the same word to mean 2 very different things, we started kind of beginning to have an argument, because the other person was thinking that's an unreasonable request, and I'm thinking that's a very reasonable request. And so the way we easily resolved that is I took a step back and I asked them, why is that a big deal for you? And they explained, well, it's going to take a long time to caption everything. And I'm like, oh no, they thought I meant something else. And we quickly put that argument to end. That's it. Which, misunderstanding, great. And the amount of relief you feel at that moment, it was all a misunderstanding. The argument doesn't have to happen. It feels so good that your relationship is repaired almost to the beginning. Obviously, it's better if you didn't have that negative interaction, but a lot of damage is reversed. Now, another reason people often miscommunicate is because of unmet expectations. So when, let's say, you agree on something, but it's not really clear and the lines aren't very distinct in the agreement, like it's not super clear what exactly a person is going to get, and they mistakenly assume they're going to get X, and they're just going to, but in the end they get Y, they are unhappy. Understandably, because they thought they were going to get something else. So if you're providing a service, or if you're going to work on a project together, you want to really clearly outline exactly what's going to happen, exactly the expected outcomes, so that there's no misunderstanding of outcomes. Because when people get what they thought they were going to get, they're pretty content. But when they get what they thought when they get something else other than what they thought they were going to get, this is where the problem occurs, because disappointment, right? So to avoid the disappointment, you want to spend extra time outlining expectations so that they are accurate to, they represent what's actually going to happen in the end. And of course, you might ultimately do insufficient work or inaccurate work so that expectations aren't met. But very often expectations aren't met just because of lack of clarity in planning. So during the planning and doing the organizing and agreeing on the outcomes, this is where you want to be incredibly aligned, and it's going to save you a lot of disagreement and disappointment and conflict at the end. Now, also, I want to highlight another reason why people have conflicts that are not necessary or occur because of misunderstandings. And this is when people are under stress, mental or physical. I'll explain. So imagine you're working with somebody and they come to you and they request something, and you already have so many things on your plate that it's just going to be like the straw that breaks the camel's back. You're so overwhelmed, and they're adding one more thing. And in that moment, because you're stressed, you're in like kind of mental anguish in a sense, it feels really bad when you're really overwhelmed. You just can't handle anymore. And people come and bring you more. You might react in a way that you would deem as, this is not myself. I'm not being myself at the moment. Like, you might be short and quick with people. You might snap at people even. It's just not you, but the situation just makes, in the moment, you just don't know how to deal with it, can't handle it, boom, explode. And the person thinks, oh, you are mean, you are angry, you are this or that. It's not, but it's not you. It's you got overwhelmed and just too many things got piled on. They don't know. Maybe you also have, in addition to work challenges at home in your personal life, maybe even in addition to this mental challenges, you have physical challenges. Maybe your back hurts. The other person doesn't know. And similarly, you don't know what the other people are going through. Maybe they have some physical injury. Whenever you have pain, mental or physical, you just end up, unless people are really good at controlling themselves, they sometimes end up lashing out or end up being just, even if they're not angry, and if they can control that, sometimes the way it comes out is they're less agreeable. They're less willing to work with you. And so you assume, oh, they don't like me, or they're not a good employee, or they're not hardworking. But they are. They just aren't telling you that they're going through all these things. Because in a professional setting, people just don't tell each other that. And all of these things, you can solve them. The miscommunications, the unmet expectations, the not knowing if the other person you're dealing with has some ailment, mental or physical. You can solve these things by asking open-ended questions. This is the most common technique, because when you ask, hey, is everything okay? If they say, yeah, that everything is fine, you can ask that same thing in a different way. Like, is there a reason that you're a little different today than yesterday? Or whatever the situation calls for. These open-ended questions, when people, instead of being defensive, actually answer the question, in that answer, there's a lot of clues as to what exactly is the issue. And then you can think about that and realize, oh, this is where we may be communicating. So the miscommunication is the very first thing to suspect when you're in a disagreement. Of course, it can be a legitimate disagreement without any miscommunication, but that's hard to solve. The low-hanging fruit is the miscommunications. And now you understand the common reasons for them. Of course, there are many, many, many more reasons for miscommunication, but these are the common reasons. And now you also understand at least the basic tools for how to begin resolving miscommunication. And in the next video, let's talk more about how to resolve miscommunications. Whether your disagreement was because of miscommunication or a much more serious reason, there are a couple of tools that will always help you. They may not solve things entirely. There's no such thing that solves everything all the time. But empathy and active listening will help you understand the other person's point of view, because, well, when you understand the other person's point of view, you will unearth many miscommunications, but you will also understand their very legitimate reasons for why they're coming to you with an opposing viewpoint. So what is empathy exactly? And empathy is in this family of this trio: empathy, sympathy, compassion. We're not going to get too deep into it, but empathy itself can be split into two things: emotional and cognitive empathy. Now, there's a lot of research being done on empathy at all kinds of deep emotional levels that maybe the mother will have with their baby. We're not going to talk about that because it's in this course, we're talking mostly for a professional setting. So in a professional setting, you don't have that deep empathy of that incredible connection that a mother has with a baby, right? It's not that empathy. But still, you have a little bit of understanding how the other person thinks and how they feel. A little bit. In a professional setting, it's a different empathy. It's a different level of intensity of the empathy. In any case, it still exists. So there's cognitive and emotional. Cognitive empathy means you understand what they are thinking a little more. Emotional empathy is when you feel a little bit of what they are feeling. You understand what they're feeling. You need both. The simplest way to get that is to ask. But not just ask, but couple the asking with active listening. Active listening is the practice of not just listening and maybe thinking about like, hey, I'm going to make this counter argument, but listening with the purpose of understanding the other person. And instead of thinking about, what am I going to say? You're thinking about, I want to really start to understand their perspective deeper. There's a lot more to say about active listening. In fact, I have a whole course on just active listening. But for our purposes here, what you really want to do is, instead of listening a bare minimum so that you can say something in return, right? That's disagreement. That's how disagreement usually arise and carry on, is because one person says something, doesn't listen to the other side, the other person says something, doesn't listen that much, and they clash, and there's a shouting match, and it's not a good experience for anybody. So instead of this, you just listen and try to understand and try to see, is there a miscommunication somewhere? Are they voicing some concern that you really maybe didn't give enough thought to? And maybe if you did, maybe if you had explained your point a little more, maybe if you had addressed it, but it was not clear that you addressed it, maybe that would have gone a longer way. And so suddenly, when you ask the other person more about their situation, when you listen to it and think about what they told you a little bit more, this other element arises, and this is sometimes compassion. Compassion is the step beyond empathy, where empathy is just understanding. Compassion is where you actually want to make things better for the other person, which is the opposite of just disagreeing, right? When you're disagreeing, you want your side to prevail. When you're in the mode of compassion, you want to help the other person, which of course, this is a way of meeting the two of you. You may never come to a perfect agreement, but if the other person senses that you're there to agree and to help them as much as to help yourself, they will often take similar steps towards you, because they will feel a decrease in that clashing, in that animosity, and an increase in cooperation. So when you have the asking questions, listening, understanding, compassion, you start to, the disagreement starts to, the underlying feelings of the disagreement begin to disappear and get replaced by cooperation, which is fantastic, because this is how you start working towards a resolution. So again, the checklist for you is ask open-ended questions, ask different kinds of questions. Don't rush to interrupt the other person when they're answering. Fully listen, fully then think about it. You can add another step. If there's a lot of information they're giving you, you don't have to resolve the argument. Then you can say, do you mind if I take an hour or a day to think about this? This is really interesting. It's some new information for me that I didn't know. I really want to make sure that I give you my fullest and best response. Do you mind if we revisit this tomorrow? Because I really feel like we came to a great point in our conversation, and there's a lot for me to digest, and I really want to do justice and give you the best answer I can. Can I have a little time to think about it? That's a great answer to give yourself extra time to think about it, and then when you come back, you'll have a world of new thoughts and ideas that you can bring and delight the other person. Hopefully they'll do the same for you, and when you delight the other person in terms of what you realized about their position, maybe you've come up with some ideas for how to work together better. And the very first thing, even before we get into them, is to understand that it's de-escalation of your own emotions, but also of the people you're talking to, because you may be aware of these de-escalation techniques, but they are not. So in a way, what you're going to be doing here is controlling yourself and them. And the very first thing in terms of de-escalation techniques is keeping your own self calm and staying calm and composed. Some things that help with that are taking breaths before you talk. That gives you just that half a second, an extra second, for you to think about things a little better, and for the situation just not to escalate in energy. You're decreasing that negative energy. You want to also talk in a steady manner that doesn't seem like you're really too passionate. Sometimes when we're really passionate about something, the other person can interpret it as yelling. So you want to take a breath and stay calm in your tone of voice. And also that same thing goes for your body language. You still want to be a little bit engaged, but just not too engaged, meaning that you still want to be engaged in the sense that your shoulders are back, you're standing up straight or sitting straight, and you're leaning forward a little bit to show interest, but you are not doing that so much that you're getting into the other person's space, which can feel offensive and can feel threatening. So you want to make sure the space is controlled by you so that it's a calm amount of space, a comfortable amount of space. Then you want to use active listening, which we talk about in other parts of the course as well, and really understand what the other person is saying. And in addition to active listening, I want to give you another technique, and that is acknowledgement. Here's how acknowledgement works. Whatever the other person might say, what you say is not what you want to say, the other argument, but you start with, I understand that you're feeling this way because of this thing that happened. I would be offended too, or I would be upset too. That's totally reasonable. I understand that. And the person will feel better. That other person will feel better after being acknowledged. They'll feel more respected. And that will actually help to de-escalate things, because very often things escalate when people are frustrated that they're not getting listened to. Like they're saying something, but they're just not getting through to the other person. So that acknowledgement technique is so powerful. It really works well in professional disagreements, in personal disagreements. When you say, I really understand what you're saying, I would be upset too, or I would react in the same way, or I would feel that way. Here's what we can do. Now, just be very careful. Sometimes people will take advantage of that because they will turn the conversation on its head and they'll say, well, I feel this and this way. And you'll say, I understand. And they'll continue and be like, well, yeah, and I feel like this and like this and like this. And that actually disfocuses you from the main point of the conversation, which is you want to make your point heard as well. See, it's not just about their point. It's about their point and your point. But you don't want to have the acknowledgement be a segue to only their point. Oh, I understand how you feel. Oh, yeah, I understand that. I understand that. And suddenly now you're frustrated because you're not getting your points met. And that was one of your biggest priorities here, is to have your points heard and listened to. So make sure when you're acknowledging, you don't fall into this common pitfall of the conversation kind of runs away, and 5 minutes later you're thinking, well, this wasn't the conversation I was trying to have at all. Now we're just talking about you and how to make things better for you, but what about me? So that's how to do acknowledgement the right way. Now also, when you're dealing with a disagreement or a conflict, what you really want to be careful of is not to place blame or accusations on that other person. Instead of blaming, what you can focus the conversation on are solutions and common grounds, where maybe both of you have a similar goal. You just have different challenges that you're facing in terms of how to meet that goal, or there's some obstacle that you're not sure how to get through. Maybe you're thinking path A is better, or you're saying path B is better, path C is better, and that's the disagreement. Maybe that's the disagreement, but the goal is the same. So you want to focus on, yes, we want to achieve this. How can we achieve the same goal that we have? Because especially if you're at work or even in a personal relationship, very often you have the same goal. Peaceful, moving forward, making things better. The goals are usually similar. The paths tend to vary. So you want to focus on the common ground that you share with the other person, rather than saying, rather than blaming, like, hey, you didn't do this part, or I told you and you didn't listen. Those kinds of things make people feel angry and frustrated and offended, and obviously they'll lash out likely. But if you just say, I understand, maybe you made a mistake, maybe I made a mistake, but why don't we focus on moving past that and moving forward to focus on what we can do to make things better long term, and how can we make it so that this miscommunication doesn't arise again in the future. And remember that while you wish that all arguments and disagreements and conflicts could be resolved in that moment within minutes, not all of them can be. So sometimes it's wise to recognize when it's a good time to take a little break. Maybe you've had a lot of energy you poured into this short conversation and it's hard to think about things, or maybe there was just a lot of new information to take in, and you might suggest, why don't we think about it? Or maybe I want to think about it, because there's a lot of new information here and you've given me a lot of food for thought, and I want to really make sure that I give you my full answer. Can I take maybe a day or two and maybe we can revisit this again, so that you give yourself so much time to think and come back to the argument in a better way, with better solutions, with understanding of, after having thought about the other person's need, now you understand what their needs are, you can propose solutions that fit their needs better, and they'll appreciate that. So sometimes taking a break and excusing yourself from a situation is very wise, because not all conflicts and not all arguments can be resolved in the same moment. And sometimes you just want to plant the seed and let a person think about what you wanted them to think about on their own. So it's not just about you. It's sometimes you plant the seed, and they may be stubborn in that moment because maybe they're angry or frustrated. But when they calm down, that moment, that idea that you might plant in their mind might come back, and they might think, well, yes, I kind of see the point. That's an accurate point. Okay, I'll have to agree with it. But it might take them a day or two. So that's the reason you might want to give them time as well. And then you want to revisit it and think and kind of probe a little bit and see, what are they thinking about my point now? And see, did their opinion change or not? Very often they might change their opinion, sometimes no. And sometimes also it's very helpful to, if the same exact thing happens in reverse, where they made a point and then you see, oh, they have a good point, that might be a good moment to acknowledge that, hey, you have a great point, I agree with this. And that's another point of agreement that you have in common with them that will help you strengthen your relationship and focus together on how to resolve the disagreement part. When you have more of an agreement, you have a stronger base to build upon and focus on that disagreement and resolve that easier. So also it's good to acknowledge when you were perhaps wrong, or where your views have changed. That might make the other person feel good about what they're saying, that it's resonating. So these are all de-escalation techniques that you can use whenever you get into arguments or disagreements, so that not only you get past those arguments and disagreements, but move better with stronger relationships that are fixed and forged for the long term. In order to understand disagreement and conflict resolution at a deeper level, we have to examine how our brain works in relation to having disagreement and conflict resolution. And there are a few parts of the brain that play a larger role. The first I want to talk about is the amygdala. It's a very quote-unquote famous part of the brain. It's often called the animal brain. You might have heard of this. This is the part of the brain that developed early in our evolution. It's responsible for many things, largely handling fight or flight and impulse reaction. So if you have some stimuli, let's say thousands of years ago, you're out in the forest, there's no police to help you, you're by yourself, and you hear some rumbling in the bushes, and you have to make a quick decision, fear or other emotions like anger. How do you react? Do you flee? Do you confront? These have to happen lightning quick. It's literally life and death, especially earlier on. Now, at work, we don't have so many life and death moments, quick react. But our brains certainly have that part of the brain really well developed, and it helps. There are many instances where we need an initial reaction. This reaction is really quick, like half a second, split second, right away. You get some stimuli, you hear something, you see something, your initial flood of reactions, flood of emotions, largely have to do with the amygdala. Now, that's one part of the brain. A lot of times, not always, but it will err on the side of anger and fear. Not always. But again, if you have that well developed in you, if a lot of your reactions at first are anger or fear or negative emotions, those connections in your brain will become stronger. Now, you might notice this in yourself a few seconds later, like a second later. Sometimes you have a moment of clarity, like, oh, I shouldn't react this way. This is because other parts of the brain take a little longer to process information. I'm talking about the prefrontal cortex, the frontal part of the brain. This is the part of the brain that's not really the animal brain. This is the part of the brain where humans have it developed the most. This is the most evolved part of our brain, the one that handles logic and reasoning, so that we can understand, should we really react with fear or anger or lash out? So if your initial reaction to something people say at work, let's say initial disagreement, the initial impulse and initial reaction handled by the amygdala might be something like this: I don't like when I'm told that, or that's going to result in more work, that's not good, or whatever, negative reaction naturally, right? And then the rest of your brain kind of comes to the rescue, says, hey, don't get fired in this place, or maybe you swallow your ego a little bit, but there's a better way. Maybe it doesn't feel as good, but the outcomes will be better if you're a little more quiet or whatever, right? This is the prefrontal cortex. So you have to understand that these two kind of play a tug of rope. They pull and pull. The amygdala is going to make often harsher, more impulsive decisions and reactions and have those kinds of emotions. What you have to do is not react so fast. Don't get pulled into negativity, things people say, things you don't like at first glance. Don't overreact. You always want to give yourself that extra second of time. Don't answer right away. Don't say something irrational right away. Give yourself a little bit of time, an extra second or two, to think through the issue so that your prefrontal cortex can have time to think. Now, some issues you'll need more time to think about. This is where statements like, I would really like more time to think about this. I understand your point. It's a valid point. Please let me think about it for 24 hours and I'll follow up. These kinds of statements take you away from conflict and let your prefrontal cortex work on the problem and think about what is the most rational outcome, not just in the immediate moment, but for the long term. That's the key here. Understanding how the amygdala works, how the prefrontal cortex works, and how you have to manage your interactions so that the the more evolved part of the brain is the one that dictates how you handle situations, has more of a chance to get engaged, the prefrontal cortex. You need to give that part of the brain more time and don't get pulled into irrational disagreements that are impulsive in the moment. And especially if you see that a disagreement is spiraling out of control in a negative direction, like it just is turning into a shouting match or something close to that, you especially want to give yourself and your counterpart that space, because they may not know this. Now you know this. They may have no idea. But even without them having any idea, you can, by giving them time and space, you can let their prefrontal cortex do its own work in their brain. And then when you come back, I'm sure very often you'll be like, well, I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry that this happened. And when you reapproach this, when you both have had time to think about it, when you feel better, then you can work through that disagreement and come to a much better place in your relationship. Now let's begin discussing conflict resolution. This is going to serve as the introduction video to it, and we'll cover it in the next videos as well. We're going to cover how to deal with direct conflict between you and your team. We're going to cover conflict resolution in negotiations and when and how to use or avoid conflict, and how to deal with conflict in our internal emotions and sensing when others are in a stressed state, which is kind of a near conflict state, that we want to avoid that in others, which is really using emotional intelligence in a way. So some of this we're going to cover in this video, some of this we're going to cover in the next videos. In this video, let's talk about how to avoid conflict, because it's like when you go to the doctor will tell you, I'd rather give you things to prevent the problem rather than dealing with the problem. So this is really important. Let's prevent the problem from ever happening anyway, as much as possible. So when you can, you want to carry yourself in a positive, polite manner. Few people start problems or conflicts with people who are pleasant and nice. It's just self-evident. bringing that energy to your interactions will get you the same from people. If you bring negative energy to interactions, it will get that same from people. So you want to start with positive energy, good greeting, positive eye contact, positive body language. It's so easy to do. Not all of us make sure to do it all the time. And starting at a positive point decreases chances of conflict, because it's going to take a lot to go from that positive space to negative. There have to be a lot of bad things that will happen to make things a conflict. And that all sounds fantastic. The problem is it's not always possible. We're human. So when we are groggy or stressed or feeling some other kind of an emotion, we are close to conflict. It doesn't matter actually what the issue is very often. What matters is the energy we have going into things. So you have to be aware, oh, I'm groggy, I'm stressed, I am not in a good place to be around people, to deal with complex situations, to add extra stress in my life or my work. That you know, and only you can know. Other people will try to add stress and work to you, but you have to manage that and tell them, hey, I cannot handle this right now, I cannot do this right now, I'm overwhelmed right now. Most of the time, that solves things, because if you say, I'm overwhelmed right now, I've never had that experience where I've said that, and the person still kept on giving me things. People generally understand that. So you just don't add, but remove stress points. Get stress points off your plate, and then when you're ready, you'll come back to that person who you're dealing with, and you'll have that conversation with them about whatever they need. Now, you also want to be sensitive about approaching others. Every time you approach somebody else, you don't know what their day is like. You assume they're okay, but you have no idea. So you want to be very sensitive to it. You can ask people if they're busy. You can ask them how they're feeling, if it's a good time. All those questions are fantastic before approaching people, because they'll tell you if they're stressed very often. And sometimes they're not going to tell you. So you want to use emotional intelligence, empathy, read their body language, get a sense for how they are, have a mental check. Are they in a good space? Are they busy? Is it worth interrupting them? Most people just barge in. Most people don't really have that mental check, but if you do, they'll really appreciate that and remember and respect you for that as a sensitive person. And that actually, instead of having conflict, actually builds rapport and strengthens the team. That's an element of trust there. So these are just the very basics you can do to avoid conflict before it ever happens. Of course, there are some situations where conflict is inevitable, but so much conflict happens where it's absolutely unnecessary. And just doing these will help you avoid the unnecessary sources of conflict. In this video, let's go over what happens after a conflict has occurred. First of all, how to self-manage so that it doesn't derail your day, it doesn't make you feel terrible, because it can have that kind of an impact, and techniques to avoid this in the future. And you can have conflicts with anybody, co-workers, clients, family members, because usually that negativity can be residual and has after effects that just linger in your subconscious. And it affects how you enter next and next and next interactions, making them more negative and kind of having this negative tint on your day. And this negativity can be short-term or lasting. If the conflict is not too bad, then the negativity from it is short-term, and it can be solved easily by distracting yourself, by doing some exercise, by having a few positive interactions that follow the negative one. And usually just the negative interaction becomes a distant memory and it's no problem. But sometimes the effects of the conflict affect you long-term, possibly in how you work, emotionally, and those require fixing the underlying issues. So let's talk about how to problem solve so that this kind of a conflict does not recur. Sometimes if it's a client that you're working with, you know, the bottom 5% of clients or bottom like 3% of your clients should be fired anyway, because they usually are emotionally draining. They take a lot of time. Usually this very same people pay least, and so on and complain the most. Those clients, send them right over to your competitor. In my work, I especially look for signals that might make them a bad client. Like if they're a little too demanding in the beginning, if they just show a bad attitude, I'm like, this is a bad sign. I might regret dealing with this person, and I might just tell them good luck, but I'm not in a position to help you. And I actually do that a lot. Yes, it's possible that I get rid of some good clients, but also it's part of my job to learn from past interactions what kind of signs led to bad clients and not have the same problem repeat and make sure that if I see those signs early, then I act and say, hey, I cannot help you. Good luck. It has to be professional, but also firm. And with clients, it's very easy. You sense it, and all the headaches they're going to give you is not worth the money. And sometimes their impact with your business can be so negative that you end up wasting more money with refunds and with time spent, with extra support, and they don't even appreciate it in the end. So that's clients. Now, you cannot always have that situation, because if it's a coworker at work, you can't avoid them. I mean, sometimes you can avoid them. That's the first thing you have to ask yourself. Is this a person that can be avoided? If it's not somebody on your team, yeah, you can avoid them. But if it is somebody on your team, can you avoid the issue of the conflict or the way the conflict occurred? Maybe you were both under stress. Maybe you were a little bit out of your element in some way. Maybe it was like a side distraction thing that the conflict was over and not the main type of work. So you see if the issue can be avoided. If it cannot be avoided and you have to keep working with this person and you cannot get out of it, try to use the SBI feedback model. We covered that in a different part of the course. It's essentially the situation, behavior, impact, meaning the way you give feedback to a person is you're very clear. You say, this is the situation that happened. This is the behavior that happened. This is that impact that behavior had on me. It's very clear, and the person can hopefully understand you, and you can hopefully work things out. If you cannot work things out, and by the way, they should do this to you, you should do this to them. You should not blame each other, but find a way to work together to fix things rather than just playing a game of blaming the other person. If you're playing the game of blaming the other person and they're on your team and so on and so on and so on, you have to not engage with that, because that's just furthering the conflict. What you have to do is see, can your boss help? Can HR help at your company? Is there any way to avoid this or fix this? So those are the steps to problem solve for that conflict to not happen again, while at the same time managing your own internal emotions. In this video, I want to address a very common situation of conflict potentially happening after your expectations are not met. It usually happens when somebody you're relying on, like a team member or freelancer, somebody that you work with, not delivering. It starts with you having very high hopes for whatever they're delivering because your business depends on it. So you're really relying on it. For whatever reason, though, they don't deliver. Maybe once. If it happens, that's okay. But if the same person is doing this again and again and again, this can be quite frustrating and actually hurt your bottom line and hurt your revenue. And so it can have real negative impacts on your business. So it can become extremely frustrating, and frustration can turn into anger and can cause you to lash out and have a conflict. This is a very common situation in a pressure-filled, stressful work environment. So what do? First, you have to recognize that this is happening. Oh, I'm having frustration and I'm experiencing this kind of an anger that's arising. First, momentarily suppress it. And instead of lashing out and saying, oh my God, like so many things are depending on it and you're terrible and you're causing us to fail, don't do that, because that's just going to cause conflict, because they're going to either get very defensive or they're going to respond aggressively. In any case, it's going to sour your working relationship. What you want to do instead is keep your professional demeanor and politely remind them. And if they're doing this a few times, make sure that you're reminding them more often as the deadline approaches. And in your mind, even though you've kind of had to swallow your anger in this moment, what you really need to do is problem solve so that this doesn't happen again. Now, let me show you what the typical problem solving solutions are for this situation. You can give them longer deadlines, or you can give them more support throughout their work. Maybe there's something that they were confused, they weren't sure, they weren't confident. So actually making their work a little easier and giving them more support, that might help them do better, because they likely aren't flaking on you because they want to. Maybe there's something hampering them, or maybe just wrong deadlines, right? So that's one way to try to solve this. The other way to solve this is maybe the task isn't ideal for them. Maybe they're just not good at whatever this task is, low confidence, low skill level. Maybe they're better at something else. So give them other tasks or easier tasks. If you cannot do any of these things, it's possible that you can come to the conclusion that you can no longer rely on them. So you basically don't work with them, because at some point you can only support an employee or a business partner for so long. But if you truly cannot rely on them, and if you've given them every chance, at some point it becomes a detriment to you to remain professional with them and keep a professional relationship with them, because they're not delivering on their part and you're investing time and possibly money in them and effort. So you gotta save your time, money, and effort on other people who deserve it and who deliver. So that's how you deal with a situation when somebody is not delivering on their deadlines and it's causing you frustration and possible anger. And this is going to help you either get more out of them or not have this happen again. In this video, I want to share a few mindsets that will help you avoid conflicts. And then I want to give you an example from a very early teacher I had who really actually helped me to turn around my mindset and really minimized my conflicts to a near zero. So first, let's talk about some of the mindsets you can have. And this is things you can tell yourself and actually really good things to sort of live by. Well, what are they? You can just tell yourself, I take the high road. I hold myself to a high standard and I don't get dragged into negativity. I avoid it. That's a very common thing you'll hear. But if you really tell yourself this is who you are, you're going to do it more often. You can also see yourself as a person who says, I'm kind to people. I treat people well. Even if people might not be great to me, I at least attempt to return kindness. Not everybody deserves to have kindness returned to them, but a lot of people do. And it's a good thing to try first. You'll at least feel better about yourself. It's a dignified approach. Also, you can tell yourself, if this conflict occurs, both I and the person I'm having conflict with, we will both lose from it. And it's ideal for both of us to avoid it and find a better solution. And the other thing you can think of, hey, maybe they're just having a bad day. Give them a break. Don't judge them. That too will help you distance yourself from the negative emotions that can sometimes drag you in. Now, let me share a lesson I had from a very early teacher in early college. And he always talked about don't get stressed out. Don't worry about things. And a lot of people in life, they'll be telling you the exact opposite. They'll be like, what do you mean don't stress out? You have to worry about work. Do you want to be a slacker? You can't not stress out. That's not what it means. It means that whatever you're stressing out about is ultimately probably not that important to stress out about. You should still give it a good effort, but it probably will only hurt to overstress, to overworry. For example, if you're late somewhere, some deadline not met, anything like that, it can seem like a huge deal. I remember myself driving to that class and I was late and I was trying to weave around the cars and I was trying to just cut corners and winning extra 5 seconds or 10 seconds at a time, right? Which really makes nearly no difference. But I was putting myself into a bigger risk of getting a ticket, which really would have wasted another half an hour or an hour if I got pulled over, or if I got into an accident, that would have wasted so much extra time. I would have never gotten to class that day and my health could have suffered. So all these things, if you realize, okay, I'll just be 5 minutes late to class or 10 minutes late to class. Yeah, it's bad, but it's not as bad as to risk so many worse things about it or to stress about it. Because when you're in that stressful moment, if you let stress get to you, you start driving yourself a little crazy. You get hyped up by everything. And most things, if you look at them from a bigger picture point of view, most things, they seem a lot less important. Some deadlines, some grades I got, some reviews that I got from years ago, none of them are that important now. In the bigger picture, they're not that important. They seem important in that day, but that's a very near-term way to look at it if you let the stress control you. In the bigger picture, extremely few things are important, like your health, family, your work, and even work sometimes is not that important. I mean, all the jobs I had 10 years ago, who cares now? Especially what happened on a day-to-day. Of course, it's important. You shouldn't slack off. I'm not advocating that you slack off or do a bad job. I'm just saying in the grand scheme of things, few things are truly important and you should not get stressed out about most things. It will just help you have a higher quality of life And actually, to be honest, it will help you do those things better because you cannot perform well under stress anyway. So few things remain that are truly important. And the biggest irony is that if you stress out over the little things, like let's say you're late somewhere and people in front of you are slow, you get angry at them. Maybe you have a conflict with them. Maybe you get an accident if you're driving. Maybe you get into a confrontation when you're walking. That hurts you a lot. That might hurt your health. That might hurt all the things that are important long term and not help any of the things that are important long term or help that much in the short term. So now when I'm late, when I'm stressed, when some deadlines aren't met, of course, it doesn't feel good. But at the same time, I have that internal dialogue and I say to myself, probably it's not important. Focus on the long term. If you take a deadline as an example, yes, maybe I'm not going to make as much money this month. But still, if it happens next month, and if I don't boil over and have some conflict and get angry and have a fight with maybe whoever I'm relying on for this deadline, if I have that conflict with them, maybe they'll quit and maybe the deadline will never get met. But if I keep a good working relationship with them, maybe the deadline will be met 2 weeks late, 1 week late, 3 weeks late. Maybe for this month it's hurtful, but for the long term, it's still helpful because whatever that work is, it's just a little late, but it will be delivered. But if you blow up on it and if you get angry, it might never get delivered. So having a long-term outlook will help you not stress out about most things while still getting them done just as well as the next person next to you who is getting totally stressed out, which by the way is completely not good for their health, and you'll have a more enjoyable time and healthier long term.